Thanks. All right, thanks everybody for coming. Weren't they great? They're just awesome. I love it when they come and perform. Thank you so much for coming out on a kind of rainy day. We're glad to have it here in Austin. You know, I say anybody who survives the summer here can never complain about the rain, ever. So I want to say thank you very much to Henry and Jim for coming out and reading for us. And Jim will start, and he'll be reading from, I think, you know, his latest book, Famous Writers I Have Known, which came out last fall. James Magnuson is the author of 9 novels, including Famous Writers I Have Known, Ghost Dancing, and Windfall. He has written more than a dozen plays that have received productions everywhere from the street theaters of Harlem to the 60s, to Lincoln Center and Playwrights Horizons. He has been a Hodder Fellow at Princeton University, winner of an NEA grant for his fiction, and for 21 years has been the director of the Mishner Center for Writers, which kind of supplies us with a lot of our employees and customers. So let's keep that thing going. Thanks, Jim.
That's great, and I want to say what a great thing Malvern Books is. It's just, this community needed it badly. My students are in and out of here in one way or the other all the time. And I think it's going to have a long life in this community. And I also love to have it feels very sophisticated to have musicians to lead off. It feels like the best. So I'm going to read a little section. Maybe I'll read about 15 minutes and then we can have some questions. This novel, I won't tell you too much at first, but I have to have this set up. It's about a small-time con man on the run who passes himself off as the world's most reclusive writer and ends up teaching in a prestigious writing program somewhere in the heart of Texas. So we'll talk about that illusion of reality later. But the narrator of this, Frankie, is a total rascal. He knows nothing about writing. The fun of it is that he realizes when he lands in Austin and he's going to get that he's going to be paid if he's mistaken for this very famous writer, he can be paid a tremendous amount of money if he can pull this off. So he ends up teaching creative writing to the best of his ability with these very talented students. And you have to understand that he knows nothing, and also that he totally, the poor director is totally fooled, has no idea. The director's name is Wayne. I don't want to say that it's me, but whatever. What else do you need to know? Also, that he tells many lies. He weaves he's learned a little bit about this reclusive writer. So there's his biography and then his own stories that he weaves in. That's enough for now. Okay, here he is as he's starting his classes. So how are my classes going? They were pretty dicey, to tell you the truth. With regular coaching from Wayne, I was beginning to pick up some of the creative writing lingo, but there was no way I was going to get it all down in a few short weeks. I was flying by the seat of my pants. The students would be jabbering away about the third person versus the first person, and I'd be wondering, where did the second person go? Sometimes when they argued about some literary dispute, my mind would go into a cloud like it used to when I was in New York and found myself in a subway car where everyone was speaking Cantonese. I've been able to coast through September on the exercises Wayne had recommended, plus of course my own stories. The kids loved them, all my tales of the Korean grocer chasing us down Broadway with a broom, of our sneaking into movie theaters in Times Square, of how when you have a big snow in New York, the whole city would shut down and we'd take cookie sheets, cardboard boxes, whatever we could get our hands on, and go sledding in Riverside all day long. They'd like to hear about when I got famous too, about the time Bridget Bardot showed up unannounced at my island in Maine to plead with me to join her crusade to save the world's endangered species. About Marlon Brando sending me the motorcycle jacket he wore in The Wild Ones for my 40th birthday. About the night I spent drinking with Little Richard and Ernest Hemingway. Did the students, also you should know that this writing program is funded by the world's oldest, richest writer who's dying. Okay. And his name is Rex Scheniger. Another story behind that. Did the students know about the feud between Rex and me? Of course they did. No one said anything, but you could feel it in the air. I'm sure that they were talking among themselves. Why wouldn't they? Here they were with ringside seats for the final round of one of the great heavyweight bouts in literary history. The problem was when their stories came in, because what they turned in weren't stories. Nothing happened in them. A divorced father buys a Christmas tree for his kids, and when he tries to decorate it, the lights won't work. A Mississippi tractor driver finds an Indian arrowhead while he's plowing, but it slips out of his overalls that night while he's playing the slots at the casino. A girl visits her father's grave in the North Woods, gets high, has a flat on her way back to her mom's place, and she doesn't have a jack. It sure wasn't Swiss Family Robinson. The pieces that worked tearjerkers were so clever they made your teeth hurt. Nick wrote this thing where Elijah's in the desert being fed by ravens, when Elvis Presley shows up in a pink Cadillac, fresh from Vegas, stoned out of his mind on pills and speaking Aramaic. But if reading these suckers was tough, the class discussions were tougher. The rule seemed to be that when your story was being workshopped, you've got to sit there and not say a word while everyone in the room goes around and says any damn thing about it that comes into his head. They had no end of suggestions. More of the mother, less of the mother. Turn the mother into an ant. Change to the third person, use more subordinate clauses, raise the stakes, cut the backstory, fill us in on the narrator's history. Where they really went nuts, though, was when they caught someone using a cliche. Apparently, it was considered worse than murdering your children. I wasn't going to mention it, but for my money, these stories could have used a few more cliches. It's always darkest before the dawn, say, or it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Something for you to hold on to. Mel turned in 4 pages that read like the instructions you fish out of a prescription bottle. As far as my responses went, I had worked up a couple of good genius expressions. The first was to put my fingers to my temples and screw up my face like I was passing a world record turd, and then, without warning, sit bolt upright in my chair, bang my forehead, bang my forehead with my fist and shout, "I've got it." The other was to get this faraway look in my eye and then let my arm float slowly off the table and start making soft little sounds like a man in touch with the gods. I had learned a couple of important lessons. I couldn't get away with merely echoing what the students said, and giving my honest opinion wasn't the best idea. When I suggested that it would be interesting if Latasha made her Mississippi tractor driver a woman instead of a man, she looked at me as if I'd been whacked a few too many times with the dumb stick. I learned to keep it cryptic. One of my favorite bits was to flip through a manuscript and randomly pick out a word. Take a look at page 7, I would say, 3 lines down. You see the word ploddingly? You need to go home tonight and spend an hour meditating on exactly what that means, and I think the whole story will open up for you. They made it pretty clear to me from the start that they expected written comments. The idea scared me to death. What I decided to do was to mark up the stories with different colored pens. I drew arrows and circled paragraphs, slashed Zorro-like Z's through long passages of dialogue. I added stars and checks of various sizes, tossing in a few question marks when there was room. By the time I finished, some of the pages looked like the freeway maps to downtown LA. Nick and Bryn were the first to get the marked up manuscripts turned back to them. Their eyes got big as pie tins. As they leafed their way through the technicolored pages, their faces got paler and paler. Bryn quietly slipped her story into her backpack, but Nick finally got up his nerve to say something. "I'm just curious," he said, his voice shaking, "about these marks." "Oh, you don't need to worry about that," I said. "Those are just my reading notes to myself." But my ace in the hole was just how in awe of me they were, despite my various screw-ups. It was nice that they would leave little gifts outside my office, a bottle of fine scotch, a hand-picked bouquet, a couple of peyote buttons in a hand-carved Mexican box, a slender volume of short stories by some glum-looking loser you've never heard of. But what made it really great was the hush when I walked into the room. I turned out to be so much wittier than I thought I was. My most casual remarks turned out to have hidden depths. I had a dog once when I was a kid, and he didn't look at me with half the admiration these kids did. Plus, I had to feed the dog. I had an aura, and somehow it felt as if I was just getting my due. I'm going to be just a little bit more. Okay. The kids were shy around me. It was a couple of weeks after Rex and Ramona and I had gotten back from our trip to the coast that Nick finally got up a nerve to ask the question they were all dying to ask. So, why did you quit writing? The room got quiet real fast. Dominique glared at him, and Latasha looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Everyone knew what he was asking. He wanted to know about my feud with Scheninger, and damned if I was going near that one. No, that's all right. Pressed my palms together in front of my lips, considering what to do. I could have just refused to answer. But there's one thing that most people don't understand about con artists. The key to getting people to show confidence in you is for you to show confidence in them. I got up from the table and went to close the door. They all stared at me like a nest of young owls. So why did I quit writing? I can trust you not to repeat this to anyone. On the table, they were all nodding and mumbling. I scrutinized them for 3 or 4 seconds and then went to the window and gazed out at the parking lot, brooding. I rubbed my hair and finally turned back to face them. I suppose, my friends, I quit writing because I got tired of feeling as if I was a fraud. After Eat Your Wheaties came out, my life turned into a 3-ring circus. Everyone wanted a piece of me. I was getting invitations to the Easter egg roll on the White House lawn. Sinatra called to see if he could cut me to cut an album with him. I didn't tell you about that? I thought I did. Then I got myself caught into some real messes. It was madness. I started drinking. I was doing a little drugs. How were they taking all this? It was hard to tell, except for Latasha, who was sneaking me little sympathetic smiles. No one would look at me. They seemed a little stricken and embarrassed. Mercedes had her head bowed as if she might be praying. Mel kept gritting his teeth, and every so often he'd surreptitiously thumb through the copies of his story, checking it on the comments the others had made on his manuscript. There was no time to write, and even when there was time, I couldn't focus. I'd work on a single page for hours, and at the end of the day, I'd look at it and realize that it was nothing but an imitation of something I'd done 5 years before. I was turning into a caricature of myself. I'd wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and think, who is this guy? That's why I moved to Maine and cut myself off from everyone. I was trying to get in touch with that still inner voice. Brett shot me a quick sidelong glance. Now, the bit about the still inner voice, by the way, is not original with me. I read about it in one of those inspirational creative writing manuals Wayne had lent me. God knows I tried. For years I tortured myself. I must have started a dozen books and ended up throwing them all in the fireplace. Mercedes looked up for the first time, her eyes brimming with tears. I suppose I've made my peace with that. The way I've come to understand it, when it happened like it happened with Eat Your Wheaties, you are just the instrument. It's like there's a wind blowing through you. Again, that's from the manual. I can't recommend it too highly. If I remember right, the author is from some teachers' college in Missouri. But how are we supposed to make ourselves the instrument of something, Bryn said. You can begin by listening to your heart, I said. There are a few things I do know. Writing is not about cleverness. It's not about proving how smart you are. You are not going to be able to fake your way through this. For openers, I'd say, start telling the truth. So there, thank you. If you would like, I could take just a couple questions, and then we want to go on to the second part of our evening. But anybody have any? Yeah, please.
With all this writing about things that we all in this room recognize, having reflection and reality.
Right.
As you were writing this and publishing it, thoughts of legal liability?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't know they're worried about legal liability, but I did worry about, there's two things I did worry about. I worried, how are my students going to take this? And the other thing, it deals with my relationship with Michener that goes back 20 years. and there's a character. The book is funny, but it's also, there's sort of a deep understory. You're sort of playing both chords, you know, musicians here, you know, you're playing high and you're playing low. And you want that little bass line underneath there. So I also was concerned about people either who knew Michener or whatever. And maybe I thought about liability, but really it was more, I worried about what I heard people, but you know what? That's a good feeling to have when you're working on a book. It shows that you're taking things out to the edge a little, there is some risk. And here's I'll tell you one great thing about the students, because they've been so great about the responses. One student, I loved her, she said, I said, so how'd you feel? She said, oh, I cried at the end. I said, well, why did you cry? I am giving away a little, but the guy at the end, the guy is, you know, this does not work. He's back in prison, and when he's in prison, and all the students have become incredibly successful, except one who's still sending him manuscripts, and he's like marking them up. Because in a way, he ends up being won over. You know, in a sort of sneaky little way, he's so cynical about it. And it seems also absurd. But in the end, he's somehow won over by this whole mad literary enterprise that we're all part of. That's one of the little things in the book. But it is a great question, and I certainly did worry and think about that. And the other thing is there was things that I knew about Mitch that was much more complex than just the big cardboard cutout figure that you all deal with, you know. So, and one way I've described it is that this feud, you know, there's a Salinger-like character and there's a Michener character. The Salinger character is written in my book, one book, never published again, and he's this god among literary figures. The Michener character is published 50, the whole world thinks he's great, and he cannot get arrested by serious literary people. So the whole issue of his reputation and his standing. So it's, you know, it's about high art, low, middle-brow art, you know, all that stuff. I'm not that smart, but I can set them up, you know. Can I take one more question? And then we'll turn to student Henry. Anyway, that's good. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.